welcome to the 19th International Ocean Film Festival here in San Francisco. We're not just in San Francisco, but we began in San Francisco. Pre-COVID, we've had the festival in Hong Kong, in Germany, in many other countries, and the goal is to take our message from San Francisco and share the ocean love all over the world. And we've been doing that virtually for the past 2 years during COVID. And the festival actually has succeeded and grown thanks to our volunteers, our leadership team, and our executive director, Ana Blanco. I want to thank you all for coming and supporting the Shark set. This is, I think it's the 15th year. My name is David McGuire. I'm with the International Ocean Film Festival, and I created the Shark set at the premiere of a film that I helped produce called Shark Stewards of the Reef. And that film was used to advocate for the first North American shark fin ban, which we introduced and passed, and also the establishment of the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument in Hawaii. We hope to do a redo and premiere it next year at the 20th festival, Shark Stewards Redo or something like that. I've been working in Kona, and I want to tell the good stories, because I don't know if you saw the trailer, but produced by Yuko Inatsiki, sorry Yuko, Inatsiki. Oh my God, I'm sorry. She's on the screening committee and one of my friends and colleagues, so she won't kill me. But Yuko also really tells this great story with our trailer every year. She's an editor. And it shows how much beauty is in the ocean and all of the things that enthrall us and intrigue us and bring us and attract us to the ocean, whether it be the whales or surfing or whatever activity or animal that inspires us. But she also shows the gravity and the heaviness and the things that are real and tragic and urgent, and that we are all facing imminently. Extinction threats, 1/3 of shark species, oil pollution, climate change, all the things that want to make you slide under your seat and just put a bag over your head. But then it ends in triumph, that we can change the world, that we can restore, we can protect before it gets degraded or before it goes extinct. And so that's really a lot about what Shark Stewards, our organization, is we try to impress upon the gravity, but also inspire with the beauty. And that's what I think the International Ocean Film Festival does very well, and the story of film can do very well. So as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, I love to have filmmakers and storytellers, and of course, we can't tell our stories without people to tell them too. And that's you, our audience. So thank you for coming and participating. So we started hosting these panels and discussions because we want to take it one step further and bring the audience into the storytelling and also into the action and taking movements and motions towards protecting our ocean, protecting our wildlife. So that's your job when you leave here or before you leave here. So I'd like to call up some of our fellow panelists. So what did I call this panel? I wanted to talk about coexistence, about how we can live with wildlife, particularly wild beasts, sharks, and communicating that and also understanding sharks, because there's a lot of misconception we have about sharks, particularly perpetuated by the media. So we have storytellers, we have great scientists, filmmakers, and communicators. And so I'd like to call our panelists up. Mary Jane Schramm, my good friend and colleague who was the communications director at the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary and is with the International Ocean Film Festival. So MJ has a great experience as a natural historian in the sanctuary, but also in communication, especially from the government side, which is very interesting, a whole different perspective from the media side. We have Kristin. Okay, Paterakis, who is with Changing Seas and PBS in Florida. And I hope you all got to see the Shark set. If not, you can watch it in the virtual film festival starting the 14th for 2 weeks. And then next we have John Dodd from the Atlantic Shark Institute. Dr. Dodd comes over from Rhode Island as a researcher, as a communicator, as a conservationist, and really a great communicator as well. Has been in several Shark Weeks and been in front of the camera. And then last but not least, James Ketchum. Dr. Ketchum comes from La Paz. He is a marine scientist, he is a marine advocate, he works in marine protection, and really great science, and applying that science towards not only conservation, but ecotourism, supporting local communities to maintain and also expand marine protection area down at the Cape in the Gulf of California. Not the Sea of Cortez, the Gulf of California. My name is David McGuire, and I'm the director and founder of Shark Stewards, and our mission is to restore ocean health by saving sharks from the shark fin trade and overfishing, but also protecting critical marine habitat, like our California marine protected areas where we've worked since 1999, protecting 16% of our coast in this interconnected network of no-take reserves and managed areas, and our national marine sanctuaries, like the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary right outside the Golden Gate, that protects whales, wildlife, and some of the most productive oceans in the world. So we could have the next slide, please. So those are our speakers, and I tried to get everybody's picture. I just did that about 15 minutes ago. And so I've just introduced our panelists. We hope that won't be too much. We don't want this to be talking head. We want this to be interactive. Feel free to ask questions. We want to engage you, and we want to come out of this with a stronger, more powerful group of people who will go out and help us save sharks from extinction and protecting our wonderful ocean. So first up, next slide, please. Oh, first up is me. Next, please. So I'm an educator, and I like to inspire, and I like to make films, but we were all kind of inspired by this film. Jaws. It came out in 1976 made after a book by Peter Benchley, who was horrified at what the film by Steven Spielberg did that really terrified people, where people in Illinois were afraid to go swimming because this movie had such an impact. And it had an incredibly deleterious effect, this cascade effect upon the public perception of sharks, and it kind of green-lighted a lot of bad behavior. Particularly here in California, I saw it as an undergraduate at UC Santa Barbara. White sharks are being hauled out, and they're being sold as fish tacos and fish and chips. There was a fishery off of Half Moon Bay that almost extirpated our population. Sharks that were in Mexico were getting killed in gill nets also. We almost lost the white shark population in the Northeast Pacific, but a large part of that was because of this vendetta killing, this backlash, and generally just not caring about this apex predator. Well, there's been a lot of films, including really bad Jaws remakes, but then there's, Shark Week, which is kind of good and bad, but it's generated a lot of energy and a lot of, I think now more positive energy. I love this film. It's a great film, and we like to show it during our Sharktoberfest celebrations in the fall, when we celebrate the return of our white sharks to our sanctuary after their incredible migration of over 2,500 miles. So Jaws actually had a very negative effect, but it also spawned, I hope, a lot of positive films and thought. Next, please. Because somehow we're fascinated, but we're terrified by sharks. And if you're in the water with a great white shark, and some of us have been, and you have a 4,000-pound animal that's evolved for a couple 100 million years to do its job as apex predator, and you're looking right at its toolkit, you have a right to be terrified. But most of us have no cause or no need. Even those of us who swim, who surf, who are in the water all the time, you have such a low risk that you think the media would be a shark driving down the freeway every day biting you or falling out of the sky like Sharknado. But in reality, the risk is very low. On average, somewhere around 50 to 70 encounters, we call them, or interactions, or bites globally, sometimes as much as 100. But if you think about almost 8 billion people, the risk is really low. The interaction rate is very low. And survival rate is actually very high. And so in general, less than 10 people die a year Next, please. But if you think about other risks, they're very, very high. We're number one, America, number one in the world in shark bites. Of course, we're big, we do it best, we play football, we have Coca-Cola. So really, it's Florida is ground zero, but actually the fatality rate is very low. It's mostly biting hands and feet, bumps and from smaller reef sharks or migratory species. That was well said in Changing Seas, if you had a chance to see the film that Kristina co-produced. Next, please. Of course, the risk of other accidents are much higher, getting killed by falling off a toilet or whatever. Lightning you hear about, but driving down the street. The risk is orders of magnitude higher in our everyday activities than it is by getting killed by a shark. But you don't read the story, man falls off toilet and dies. But if a shark bites someone, do you think that a shark has bitten somebody every single day for 2 weeks until the next story? Because in the news media, if it bleeds, it leads. We try to turn that around by working with shark survivors. I co-wrote a book called Surviving the Shark with a young survivor at Simpson Beach, Jonathan Catherine. He was 16. Our co-chair, Maria Corsomeros, down in Southern California, was bitten by a shark while swimming. And now these shark survivors are turning their fear into fascination and their message, which is intriguing, into a triumphant story that these sharks need to be protected, that we're in their backyard, we're sharing their space, and hopefully the two of us as species can continue to coexist. And that's an increasing concern as our white shark populations increase. The white shark population has been protected here since 1993. In general, it may take about 3 decades for a shark population to recover because of their reproductive strategy: slow growth, relatively few young, long gestation periods. Dr. Ketchum here can attest, after 15 years of conservation in Cabo Pulmo, we're starting to see the sharks recover. It takes a long time for shark population to recover after overfishing. And so now we are seeing young white sharks that are pupped down in the Southern California bight move their way north, also perhaps associated with increased sea surface temperatures. We're seeing these little resident populations, like off Capitola, that haven't been described in decades, if ever. And we're seeing more large adult populations like we have off of our coast, which we call the Red Triangle. So we have this incredible area, the Farallon Islands, Año Nuevo, Point Reyes, where these large pinniped populations are recovering after the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. And that's shark food. So the shark population is a little bit retarded behind the pinniped population. So we have more pinnipeds than sharks, but they're doing their job maintaining the balance. So we want to continue support this apex predator population. However, you're seeing a lot more concern and even a little bit of grumbling about killing white sharks because there's too many of them. On the East Coast, we're having a similar phenomenon. We've been protecting them on the East Coast. We see them coming back up to the Atlantic seaboard in the area where Peter Benchley wrote Jaws, and there's been a lot of press, particularly combined with technology. You tag a shark, you know where it is. Suddenly the media starts tagging the shark, and oh my God, there's a shark there. Well, what happened before you tagged the shark? Guess what? The shark was there. And we didn't know it, or we knew it as surfers or swimmers or divers, but most people didn't. So there's a real misconception because of technology, because of also amplification through social media, that the sharks are out there to get us. Oh my God, we got to save our children. We have to kill sharks. So it's a real concern, and it's actually a very real concern. And ultimately, someday, there may need to be management in the population. Who knows how that will occur? It's going to take good science, and it's going to take really good communication, because we don't want to repeat of the 1980s and extirpate this population, because sharks are maintaining the health and the balance of our ocean ecosystems. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Dodd, who's on the East Coast, who's experienced this phenomenon. I think one more slide, next slide. That's you, right? of the Atlantic Shark Institute. And we invited him here. He's not associated with the film, but we hope he will be next year, because we would like to get Kristin and Changing Seas to do a cool film on white sharks of the East Coast and the West Coast. But he's actually, you may have noticed, and if you saw actually two of the films, Emperors of the Deep, and also Kristin's film, you're seeing these white sharks on the East Coast, and there's a little bit of a hysteria, and there's some people who actually would like to see those sharks maybe swim somewhere else. So, Dr. Dodd, you want to give us a little overview of your work and what you're experiencing in Rhode Island and Long Island Sound and elsewhere along the Eastern Cape?
Certainly. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So the Atlantic...
You press the button on the mic, just so it goes green.
Yeah, we need the audio. We are recording this.
How are we doing now? Oh, there we go. Okay. So anyway, John Dodd from the Atlantic Shark Institute. I'm the executive director. We're based in southern New England, Rhode Island to be exact. And we are a shark research organization. So what we do is we try to find answers to questions that haven't been answered yet. We try to find things that are of interest, that are of importance to biology, to sustainability of sharks, so that we're not duplicating work that was done by somebody else. You know, there's not a lot of resource in this marketplace. It's not easy to get funding, so we want to make sure that the time we spend is well spent, and that's why you'll find us being a principal investigator in charge of a project, co-principal investigator, partnered or collaborator, where we're helping principal investigators to try to get answers about a particular shark or shark species, and we're trying to figure something out that folks have yet to figure out. So in doing that, we currently have projects involving white sharks, primarily young of the year, newborns and juveniles. We have projects with the short fin mako that is now in real trouble. You can't take them, which is good news, bad news. They take about 20 years before they can reproduce for the first time. So it's not too difficult to figure out how they're in trouble. Takes them, and the female has to be a little over 600 pounds before she can reproduce. So if you've ever been to a shark tournament, which is not necessarily the most fun place to go, very, very rarely do you see a shark over 600 pounds if you're looking at for makos. So none of those, if they're females, have ever reproduced. We work with poor beagle sharks, or cold water shark. We do research with common thresher, blue sharks, and we're going to add a couple of sharks this season because we're starting to see them in New England waters where we've never seen them before due to warming waters. So we keep ourselves busy year-round. Our primary research season is May through November, and we're not when we're not in that season. We're typically following sharks down the coast, depending upon what it is we're pursuing and what research we're trying to get done. So I was in the Carolinas not too long ago, so depending upon where they are and what we're trying to do, we'll track them down. And I think that'll about do it for this particular. If people have questions, additional questions about the Institute, we can talk about it through the question and answer period.
Thank you. I had a question because we were talking. We were talking earlier about it, and it was actually in one of the films, but about. I know Lydia is one of OSearch's sharks, right? And then was it Mary Kay, who's been getting a lot of news, and Greg Scoball, who's a friend and a really good scientist and does a good job kind of navigating between Shark Week and real science. But he's also in the press a lot because of these nearshore white shark activities. So can you just kind of share what's going on with that particular shark and the public sentiment and how the media is sharing that or
Sure.
amplifying?
So what's happened, particularly in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, is there's been a return of the seal population, which is actually an enormous success story. They were at really small numbers only a few decades ago, and now they're in the tens of thousands, which is great to see, with a couple of exceptions. If you're a fisherman or a commercial fisherman, they don't love them because they are wonderful predators, so they eat a lot of fish. I'm not in that business, so I still love them. But white sharks also really like them. So with the return of the seal population, we've seen a significant increase in the number of white sharks that are up and down the Cape Cod beaches and also around into Cape Cod Bay. So Greg Skolmo with the Mass Department of Marine Fisheries has an extensive array of acoustic receivers all the way around Cape Cod. He's tagged almost 300 great whites so far, and as a result, he's able to really track the movements of these sharks, both broad scale, meaning large areas, and fine scale, small areas. And I've been on the boat enough, and we've got our spotter pilot up in the plane, and these sharks are going right into very, very shallow water. So we will literally have a 12-foot white shark in the water here, in 6 feet of water, and the gentleman back there at the door is waist deep saying, "What are you guys doing?" You know. And we said, well, there's a pilot above us, there's 6 of us on the boat, we've got instrumentation in the water, and there's a 12-foot great white right here. And that's because the seals have 2 options. They're going to sit on that beach and eventually starve to death, or they're going to run the gauntlet. And these sharks have become very proficient at waiting and hiding, and it's a cat and mouse game that's going to start in late May, get into really significant interactions as the summer months go on, and then wane in November, December as those sharks head south again. So it's set up a lot of conflict, of course, because you've got millions of swimmers in Cape Cod, and you've got this apex predator, and there was a fatality a couple of years back. So what they've done is they've also installed 5 live receivers. So most of them are passive, meaning they will record a movement. It sits in the receiver until you come and pull all the data out. But they also have 5 live receivers. Shark goes within a few hundred yards, boom, it hits it, uploads it to the lifeguards. The lifeguards say, "Shark is there, blow the whistle, get everybody out." And it's a good system with one significant caveat, which is that a small percentage of these white sharks have been tagged. So if you've tagged, and they don't have the population number out yet, Greg is working on that with a PhD student, Megan. It's going to come out soon, but it's certainly going to be in the thousands, don't know how many. So if you've tagged 300, you just don't know how many are in those waters or up close enough to those beaches that aren't tagged. So it's a great system. It's providing a lot of information, but it doesn't mean that you can go off into the water and enjoy yourself risk-free if that's something you'd like to do. So a lot going on in Cape Cod with the resurgence of the white shark. Really interesting place to be, and the data gets better and better and more detailed each season that passes with Greg and his team.
Thank you. Well, it's kind of a nice segue. Kristin is with us from Miami, Florida, and her film, Recreational Shark Catch, kind of talks about the community engaging with scientists, trying to collect data, but also Florida in particular, you see a lot of interaction. As I said earlier, that is shark bite capital of the world. And the risk of a bite actually is much higher than most places, but again, it's generally not fatal bites, arms, hands, and feet. But the perception there is perhaps a little different. So can you share us what's going on in Florida and about all those sharks that are swimming along, but also all of those people who are in the water with them?
Yeah, I'm probably not the expert on the topic, so I'll have to get some of those statistics.
Well, you can from the media perspective, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, you see it a lot. There's going to be attacks and stuff, and specifically with the episode looking at recreational shark fishing, that was one of the biggest arguments. People were afraid that the anglers were bringing sharks closer to shore when they are close to shore already, and we might not notice it. And I think during the pandemic, it was an interesting time because more people were looking out their windows, especially like downtown Miami, and seeing sharks. And with the drones and stuff, you're realizing that this wildlife is right there, and we're interacting with it all the time, even though you might not see it. And we're starting to learn a little bit. Maybe if the water's a little murky, that seems to be when shark attacks happen. So maybe a better idea to stay closer to shore or something like that if you're going out. But yeah, I mean, I think there is a big change I don't think you're hearing as much that they're this dangerous creature, and we are getting to a much better place. I mean, shark tourism in Florida is huge. There's a lot of boats, so it's illegal to chum the water to attract sharks in Florida state waters, but it's not outside of the Florida state lines, and that's just 3 miles out. So there's plenty of boats, you might have heard in Jupiter, that go out and take people. And American Shark Conservancy, which Hannah Med was featured, they work with a lot of the shark tourist companies, and they take pictures of the sharks, they ID them, they have a little laser device to see the size of the sharks. They have some dive masters that are trained to give education talk beforehand. And that's one way to raise awareness and get people, some people are saying they're less afraid of the sharks now that they're able to interact with them and see them and dive with them, and that starts a little bit of an appreciation to them. So a little bit of my spiel.
What about the public safety perspective? Is there a lot of signage or the warning system with the lifeguards there?
That's a good question. I don't think there's.
Not that I've seen. I mean, there's
I
condos right on the beach and a lot of structures that are so close.
Yeah, I think they'll have a dangerous animal sign, but it might be for what's it called, the Portuguese men of war and stuff. So I don't think it's specifically to sharks. So I think if somebody screams, people might run out of the water or into the water, depending on what kind of person you are. But.
Well, it's almost a whole other discussion, the whole shark alert system. The surfers, of course, at least here at Ocean Beach, it's kind of a coconut telegraph, and you hear about it, and sometimes you even see a shark jumping out on the surfline camera, and the surfers will tell each other. The only problem is the next guy pulls up and checks out the uncrowded surf and paddles out. And in Southern California, there's actually movement towards, particularly in Huntington Beach and Laguna Beach, engaging public safety, and we're trying to work with an app that people can check to see if there was a shark there recently. But it's not integrated throughout the state. West Australia, New South Wales, South Africa has some systems, but there's nothing that's really comprehensive for communicating, I guess, that something, an animal, a big shark was there. It's interesting, I have relatives there, and it's a very different place than California. Other than you have a lot of sharks, which we both share. We're both really weird states, let's just say that. But it actually kind of is a nice perspective from coming back to the West Coast here, where we have marine protected areas, the first National Marine Sanctuary to the south. We have 4 National Marine Sanctuaries in our state waters. We're now proposing a 5th along the Big Sur coastline, the Chumash Heritage Area, which is currently in the public comment and consideration area realm. It'll probably take a couple years. MJ Schramm was with our Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. Well, first the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary, then it became Greater because it was expanded. And she worked in communications, and a lot of that communications was around white sharks because we have this large aggregation, not only off the islands, but near shore as well. So MJ, tell us a little bit about, your experience when we started to see this increase in more interactions between humans and our favorite visitors.
Well, white sharks are always a hot topic. There's nothing to get the public attention, save for a sighting of a Tyrannosaurus in Golden Gate Park, than a white shark. So you know that anything having to do with him is going to be in the public eye big time. But one of the things that the sanctuary does is that we have regulations, and we have very few regulations, but we make sure that they're very important ones. And when I say we, I do have to emphasize that I retired a year ago, so I'm still kind of joined at the hip with them, but I can no longer speak officially for them, so take that with a grain of salt today. But we discovered that there were some pretty serious impacts happening on the white shark population at the Farallones. There were a number of boats that would go out to the islands, and there could be 5 or 7 of them at one time during the fall. And we have a very special population of white sharks out here. These are all adult and subadult white sharks. So these represent the core breeding population for future generations of white sharks in this part of the Pacific. And so it was incumbent on us to make sure that any kind of pressure that was impairing their survival would be removed. So back in 2003, I was part of the Sanctuary Advisory Council's Wildlife Disturbance Working Group, and we looked at a lot of issues about weighing the value of getting people out to experience white sharks, either cage diving or just viewing them from a boat, versus the impacts that would be, or that would happen as a result of that. And we had the specialists, biologists from the Farallon Islands who had been studying them for a long time and were experts on their behaviors and their life patterns, how many seals or sea lions they might capture and eat in the course of just the few months that they might be there. And we were documenting information about boats charging in on a live kill that the shark had just done on a seal or a sea lion and scaring the shark away from its prey. And that has major consequences for its survival, because the white sharks, when they leave these waters in late winter, they go roughly 1,200 miles offshore to an area where there really are no pinnipeds, seals or sea lions, which are very calorie-rich, blubberlicious, to an area where there are mainly cephalopods, squid and octopus and things like that, but not a real good square meal. And then whatever they do there, and scientists aren't quite sure, do they mate there, or they do this crazy diving pattern, but how important is that critical habitat, and how dire is it if an animal, if a white shark, has to leave here for that destination on a half-empty tank, essentially, because that's a long round trip. You said, 2,500 miles altogether, roughly. So we put together a lot of information. We consulted many experts, and then back in 2009, we enacted regulations that prohibited, because this is such a special area, prohibited approach of any of the white sharks. When you're within 2 nautical miles of the Farallon Islands, you cannot approach them within 50 meters. So that's, 150 feet roughly. So, these are measures that we had to implement because people sometimes out of the best intentions were disrupting them, and others were basically out there to make some money. But I think the common interest, I think the driving interest these days, given how far education about sharks has gone, is that most people care about them and care about conserving them. So we just need to get the word out as a public information officer. It's the right way to do them. How do we relate to them in our lives on the planet? Are they squeaky toys for us to swim up to and stroke or do whatever? Are they monsters to be feared? Neither of those options works for long-term survival of any species. So it's finding that golden mean that lies in between the two and being able to get the word out as to how people, and especially operating vessels, should be behaving around white sharks and letting the white sharks dictate the interaction. I was privileged to have an experience on the islands, at the islands in 1997, of seeing the first documented white shark killed by the killer whales, and that was. I've seen white sharks out here before a number of times. It's been, I think, 5 or 6 years since I've seen one, but at that time I was thinking white sharks are the biggest and the baddest, and then all of a sudden these killer whales come up and they're virtually never seen around this area. They seem to give the Farallon Islands a wide berth, and all of a sudden I saw a white shark being killed by a killer whale, and it's like, this is vulnerable. This is immense muscle power and tooth power and everything, and it's taken out in just the blink of an eye by a larger and probably very smart animal. So it's like, they need protection. They're not on the bad side. They're things that we need to exercise stewardship over. So anyway.
So yeah, it's we liken the Farallon Islands to be the in and out for the white sharks, and they swim 2,000 miles to the salad bar. And it was inexplicable until the satellite tagging done originally by Peter Pyle and Scott Anderson, then with the Point Reyes Bird Observatory, but also Barbara Block at Stanford Hopkins Lab and Sal Jorgensen and others at the Monterey Aquarium. We're seeing these sharks go out to this white shark cafe where they're actually diving over 5,000 feet, which is extraordinary. And that was shown, I think it was in Kristin's movie, one of the movies today. It showed how deep these sharks are actually diving in this extraordinary behavior. We believe they're reproducing out there, and the females are coming back. They have a year gestation period before they give live birth to a few pups. And then that's generally in Southern California, with Southern California Bight, where my colleague Chris Lowe is studying them, and he's getting a lot of data, acoustic tags, and we're getting this real-time data, like thousands of data points, because these sharks are kind of hanging out, circling around. Well, there's about 100 boogie boarders and surfers, and they're eating rays and fish. They don't eat marine mammals yet. So I swim in a place called Ray Bay, where my mother lives in Southern California, in the lifeguards know because I'll swim the whole bay back and forth. And they're like, yeah, the sharks, they put a drone up, and they know exactly where these young sharks are outside of the surf line and around me. But as John Dodd said, most of these sharks are right there. You don't see them, but particularly down there, the water quality is not as good. So sometimes it's better what you don't see than what you do see. So we're really fortunate to have a sanctuary and to have surfers also who appreciate sharks, and some are a little more scared than others, but actually respect them. Shark attacks are very, very low, of course, and we tend to have a bit more of a coexistence than I've experienced in many places in the world, and I think that has a great deal to do with the work of MJ and the sanctuary. I'm fortunate enough to have a NOAA permit, and we provide data to the sanctuary as well as the researchers, and we identify sharks through their fins, which was the former way that Peter and Scott did, and now we do it through underwater photography and pattern matching algorithms, so we can actually match the shark and see and actually identify new sharks without ever tagging them. So pretty cool. So if you want to go on a public trip, we lead a couple in the fall. So I'd like to introduce our next guest. Unfortunately, he's on the calendar here, or on the agenda, but wasn't on earlier because we thought Hendrik was on another panel. Hendrik Schmidt, my friend from the Jet Lag, and Claudia, who are filmmakers. They're up on stage. They've had several films in the film festival. They have 2 in this festival, and we just showed one. If you haven't seen it, please join us at the virtual International Ocean Film Festival starting next week, running for 2 weeks, intloceanfilmfest.org. Hendrik, why don't you come up and let's just talk a little bit about your global shark trotting and the perspective as a filmmaker and somebody actually who doesn't shy away from sharks, actually seeks sharks, and how successful have you been at it?
Let's try a microphone.
Yeah, come over here. We're going to share it.
Yeah, let's share. We always do that. Yeah, hello. As you said, I'm Hendrik. I'm a filmmaker, and I actually try to get close to the sharks. Yeah, so if someone would tell me there's a shark, I would just jump in there and try to get a picture of it, which is harder than most of the people think, as sharks are quite shy animals, and they don't like us scuba divers as we are pretty loud and make bubbles. Yeah, so most of the time when we see a shark, it's gone quite quickly, and you need a lot of time to actually get good footage of them. So my first hammerhead shark I wanted to film. I had a buddy there who got really excited about the hammerhead shark. Wasn't her, it was someone else. Yeah, and I just heard this scream from her. She turned around underwater and screamed, "Hammerhead!" And I looked at the shark, and in the moment the sound hit the shark, it just went off. And actually something like that happened quite often. But what's always interesting with sharks is definitely they have, all of them have different character. So my favorites actually are the black-tip reef sharks, because I always compare them to dogs. They actually are quite curious, and they like to check you out, and they actually also like to check out how long you're down there and when you go out of the water again. So I had one actually following me and actually bring me back to the boat, and then au revoir, yeah. Yeah, so my biggest, my outcome I want to have with this panel discussion is actually the communication and understanding sharks of like how we as filmmakers can make a difference in the perspective to sharks. As we all know, Jaws wasn't a good approach, and Sharknado I actually haven't seen yet, but I heard it's quite good. Yeah, it's good, right?
Yeah, it's
good. Yeah, 6 episodes or something, right?
Yeah,
It's going. Of course, for us as conservation filmmakers, we always try to show, the bad treatment they have and what they are facing with, especially the fishing industry, and the numbers of like how many sharks are getting killed a day are quite high. And I have witnessed some villages in Indonesia where they are hunting for sharks and for their fins, of course. And it's just very depressing, believe me, to see a whole village full of dead sharks laying around there in the sun for a soup in the end. And this is an issue which goes on for such a long time, and everyone actually knows about it. But, through your good work, and I remember I've been with him walking through San Francisco trying to find shark fins. No, we didn't succeed, right? More or less, they were hiding it. We didn't have enough cash in the pocket, I guess. But if you go to Singapore or something, you will find it in every store, just in the front, in the window. You can buy it everywhere. And also, I have to say that to my other friends, the manta ray, as the shark population goes down, now they are targeting manta rays for their gills. So the industry always tries to find something new. And in the end, I hope every one of you will see a shark one time in their life, or better, twice in their life, of course. They are really majestic and really beautiful animals, and they are just wonderful to look at, especially when they are in the water. Yeah, but again, it's really hard to get them in front of the camera. Yeah, and close. Yeah.
Well, I think it was in Bill's film, Emperors of the Deep, this sort of off-cited statistic, 100 million sharks and rays are killed a year for overfishing to supply the fin trade. Well, we know around 20 million just from trade data are blue sharks, and blue sharks are disappearing, including here in the Pacific. The number's more likely 90 million, not because we're not trying to fish them, it's just because there's fewer sharks. But, it kind of begs the question, right? Jaws, it's like sharks kill people. They're just like a big fish without hair, right?
Yeah, they're just a big fish without hair, right? Oh, did I just get slapped by a shark?
Yes, my shark name out of your mouth.
Wow, that was the biggest International Ocean Film Festival Academy moment ever. So if you haven't seen a shark yet, now you have. And if you want to support protecting sharks and saving his friends, you can text that number and learn more and help us pass the U.S. Shark Fin Trade Elimination Act. So thank you, Mr. Shark. Charles, thank you, Hendrik, for coming out. Let's go diving and see some live sharks again. So a hard act to follow, James, Dr. Ketchum. Our last speaker, and then we're going to open it up for conversation. James came up from La Paz. He's a scientist and runs a nonprofit down at the Cape and has really great stories, as we saw in the film festival, but also a lot of work that you did not see in the film. And he's going to share a little bit of the work that's being done a little bit south of our border.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. So I have a little bit of slides here. Thank you. So this is kind of a follow-up for the presentation of the film that you saw today. The next one, please. So we work in the Gulf of California. If you've never been there, it's a fantastic place. It's that body of water between the Baja Peninsula and the mainland of Mexico. It used to be full of sharks and thriving with a lot of life. The next one, please. And I have a few pictures of the iconic species of the Gulf of California. This is the black tip shark, which is quite amazing. This is the oceanic black tip, so it loses that black tip as it grows. They only have the black tip dorsal fin as their juveniles. The next one, please. And these black tips have been depleted from the Gulf of California. The only place where you can really see the black tips is Cabo Pulmo. We can see up to 1,000 animals during the winter. And other than that, they're disappeared from the Gulf of California. This is a silky shark. It's also an iconic species, not only in the Gulf of California, but worldwide. It's a tropical species. And we get them in the Gulf of California in the summer. And they tend to be quite abundant. In the last years, thanks to a shark fishing ban by the Mexican government, we have seen more and more of the silky sharks in the summer months. The next one. This is a famous whale shark. This is quite iconic of the Gulf of California. If you've ever been diving in the Gulf of California, this is a typical sight, especially during this time of the year. In the winter, we see the juveniles aggregating near La Paz. And in the spring, around this time, in April, May, we see the big females. This is a big female, about 45 feet in length, some of them almost 50. They're humongous, and they believe some of these are pregnant. So they come into the Gulf of California to have their babies. The next one, please. So the Gulf of California is kind of like a nursery of many of these species. This is a bull shark. This is in Cabo Pulmo. The bull sharks have been recovering slowly, and Cabo Pulmo is one of the few places where you can still see bull sharks. There's a population of about 400 bull sharks in Cabo Pulmo. We've been tagging them and following this species in the last 10 years. And through all this information, we know they're resident of Cabo Pulmo. The next one, please. So we'll talk a little bit about the hammerheads. This is kind of the follow-up of the documentary. The next one. And they used to be quite abundant in the Gulf of California in the 70s, 80s, up to the 90s. The next one, please. And this is some of the, that's a famous place, that's El Bajo Seamount, that's off of Espiritu Santo Island, and used to be very famous back in the 70s, 80s. People will go there and dive with this hundreds of hammerheads just swimming around in this rock in the middle of the ocean. So it was very famous. Filmmakers like Howard Hall and a lot of people made their way down into La Paz to see this incredible sight. Now it's all gone. If you're lucky in the summer months, you could see a school of about 50 or 60 juveniles if you're lucky. Typically, there's nothing. Not only the hammerheads have disappeared, but also the tuna, all the rest of the fish. So typically, it's like an empty rock. So we're working very steadily to try to recover this famous pelagic system. The next one, please. So today, I have very few left at the same island, and before, as I said, many were quite abundant. The next. So this is more or less what happened. This is a study from one of our students. So he analyzed sightings of hammerheads in the Gulf, especially here in El Bajo Seamount. So in the 80s, we could see that there were like about 60, sorry, some of it's in Spanish, 60 hammerheads per hour you could see in the 80s. So everything kind of went down in the 90s because of, as we showed in the documentary and the film, a lot of overfishing by industrial fisheries and also quite a bit of artisanal fisheries. So by 2000, early 2000s, very few sharks were left. I remember diving early 2000, like 2001, I would see like 5 hammerheads in a good day. And 2 days before, I was able to see like 100. So just a few years, everything crashed down. So it was pretty bad. So there's a recovery, as you can see here in 2018, a little bit of recovery. Most of the animals are juvenile, so it doesn't mean that it's a full recovery. What we used to see back in the 80s and 90s was schools of large females. So we haven't seen that back again. So hopefully we can recover the system, this place back. The next one, please. We'll talk a little bit of the whale sharks. I've been studying the whale sharks in the Gulf of California for the last 20 years, a little more actually, 25 years. Next one. And most of them, the juveniles, they're aggregated in the southern part of the bay in an area called Mogote, which is that sand strip in the south, just north of La Paz. The next one. And the aggregation area of the large female sharks, adult female, it's up in the northern part of the bay, central northern part. And this area, it's quite big, so you need to hire a spotter plane to find these humongous females. The next one. And this is more the aggregation of this area. This is a study I did for my master's. So the aggregation of the juveniles are in the bottom of the bay over there, and a little bit on the west side. And the rest all around in the offshore islands are larger animals that you tend to see in the springtime. The next. This is some of the tracking we've done, placing satellite tags on some of the whale sharks, and we've seen that some of them move all the way down to the Revillagigedo archipelago. Some of them that we've tagged in the Bay of La Paz move all the way down, and others move from Bahia de Los Angeles down to San Blas. So a lot of movements. These are highly mobile animals. Some of them, they do move across the Pacific. So a lot of this stuff has been recently known, and there's still a lot to discover about these animals. The next one, please. The bull sharks in the Gulf of California, as I said, in Cabo Pulmo. The next one, please. They tend to aggregate in this tiny place. The next one, over there in Cabo Pulmo, is a tiny MPA. It's only 70 square kilometers. And we've been studying the bull sharks and other species there for the last 10 years. So we find pretty interesting stuff. The next one, please. So Cabo Pulmo lies in the entrance of the Gulf of California, so it's pretty dynamic in terms of the oceanography, and also quite productive, so there's always food in the water. And because of the protection of the last 20 years, it started 25 actually, this MPA was created in 1995, so right now we're hitting year 27. So after 27 years, the recovery of these top predators is amazing. So not only these sharks are thriving, but also the fish full of jacks, snappers, groupers. There's a Gulf grouper in Cabo Pulmo, which is extinct from the rest of the Gulf of California, and in Cabo Pulmo you can still see the endemic Gulf grouper. So going back to the bull sharks, they're becoming quite abundant. This is a place where you want to go diving. Typically right now, this is a good time. And this is a typical site in some of the dive sites in Cabo Pulmo. The next one, please. And this is one of the acoustic receivers that we have. So we use telemetry to study the movements of the animals, both satellite tracking and acoustic telemetry, to understand how these animals move within the Gulf of California, how long they reside in these hotspots like Cabo Pulmo. So this is a tagged bull shark moving next to the receiver, so we get a ping on the receiver, gets recorded, and with that we'd study the residency, how long they stay around these reefs, and if they leave, whether they go, if there's connectivity to other places, other islands. You have a question?
Why do you think that the bull sharks persist, but the hammerheads and other species of sharks kind of faded?
The bull sharks what? Didn't get it?
Like stayed there and
Oh. In Cabo Pulmo, yeah, the thing is that food is very abundant, so bull sharks tend to feed in reef fishes, and in Cabo Pulmo, they're all over the place, the reef fishes, so they go there to feed. It's basically a feeding station. And through the years, in the last 6 or 7 years, we've seen that some of these sites have become also a cleaning station. So they go there to feed and get cleaned. So we've seen the whole process, how this whole system has been maturing in the last 10 years. And we had a student did a master's study when Kristin was there, and she analyzed the historical abundance of the sharks. And she found that interviewing the fishermen and the captains and the divers, she found that the abundance that we have right now and diversity of sharks was also seen in the 60s and 70s. And everything went down again. Same thing with the hammerheads in the 80s and 90s. But Cabo Pulmo right now, it's a recovery example, except El Bajo Espiritu Santo. Yes?
Would you say maybe the reason for this differential recovery between hammerheads and the bull sharks remain in a protected area, whereas the hammerheads are much more out in the open water, so they run the gauntlet, but these don't?
Yeah, that's a good comment. That's a possibility. And also another possibility is that Cabo Pulmo is a no-take. And because shark fishing is banned, both commercially and sports fishing, that has helped a lot. So Cabo Pulmo is 70% no-take. And El Bajo Espiritu Santo, it's an open place. Well, it's part of the protected area of Espiritu Santo, but there's no enforcement. So anybody can go fish commercially or do sports fishing. So, and the end result is that the recovery has been very slow, in contrast to Cabo Pulmo, full recovery, as far as we know. But that was a good question. And definitely, hammerheads are much more mobile than bull sharks. But in the last years, by tagging these animals, we've seen that they can move up towards La Paz, so that's around 100 miles north, and back to Cabo Pulmo. So they're also quite mobile. So as they move out of Cabo Pulmo, they also get caught in the fisheries. The next one, please. So this is some of the data that we get from the receivers, and don't actually see it very well, but those blue lines, or blue dots, each individual line or blue dots, it's a different individual animal on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we wouldn't really see it. Well, partially, it's time, no? It's a date. So this is what you get with acoustic receivers. So it like pings through time, and we can see here in that central box, we don't really see the black dots. So we place receivers in deep water and also some receivers in shallow water. So the deep water receivers were pinging more during the warm months. So before we thought that the bull sharks were leaving during the summer or late summer because the water got very warm. So what really happened is that the bull sharks were going down deep into the deep receivers, around 300 feet of water, 200 feet or 300 feet. So that's what this figure is showing, but doesn't show very well right now. The next one, please. So some conservation challenges and opportunities in Gulf of California. The next one. A few years ago, I was with Sylvia Errol over there in the middle of the picture, and she wanted to do some diving and get some filming of the sharks. But unfortunately, we went to the southern part of the Cabo Pulmo. It's called Los Frailes, and there's still a shark fishing camp there, still. So she was really shocked that this camp was still there. So when Cabo Pulmo was designed, the park, the MPA, they never thought of moving this camp to another place. So the shark fishermen stayed there within the park, although they say they move up to other areas to fish, but we're not sure. So they came back at the same time we were coming into the beach to get a dive. They came with a boat full of dead sharks. So Sylvia was like really, really upset. So I was trying to comfort Sylvia, look, this is what they do. At the same time, the fishermen, they were getting upset because they were taking a lot of pictures, and they were telling me, oh yeah, we know they're going to post this on Facebook, and they're going to say we're killers of the sharks. So I was in the middle, tried to control the sharks and Sylvia Earle's group and blah, blah, blah. So that was conservation in action. And as you can see, there was a tiger shark, a silky shark, a large female scallop hammerhead, and probably pregnant. Were all dead, of course. And so this is some of the issues that we have in the Gulf of California. Some of these species still caught in these areas quite near to these MPAs. And if you have an open area where there's no regulations, you can just fish whatever you like. The next one, please. So what is really the problem in Mexican waters? As we showed in the documentary, a lot of the species are unprotected. The next one, please. There are a lot of industrial fisheries that some of them are directed to the sharks and others are for other species, but there's a lot of bycatch. The next one. Another click, please. So some of this bycatch is this, the sharks get caught in nets in some places. Some juveniles or really very small baby sharks are caught as well in the nurseries. The next one, but I think there was another one before, it doesn't show. Anyways, only 3 species are protected in Mexico: the white shark, the basking shark, and the whale shark. That's it. All the rest of the species, although critically endangered worldwide, like the scallop hammerhead, great hammerhead, they're not protected in Mexico. You can fish for them in Mexican waters. So we're striving and pushing with the Mexican government to protect them. Otherwise, we're just going to keep them being caught. The next one, please. However, we've been having a lot of shark tourism in the last years. In the last 10 years, shark tourism worldwide has been growing a lot. And that's one of my kids watching a whale shark near La Paz. So this has been producing a lot of income for the local families in Baja California. The next one. And this is a silky shark in the Reviejero archipelago that brings a lot of tourism over there to see the sharks and the giant manta rays. The next one. And as we saw, and we talked about this in the documentary, the value of the sharks, in this case the hammerheads, it's about $150 per dead shark, just a single time, and it's near over $250,000, $360,000 per shark per year in the Galapagos Islands. We think this is a similar value, or was a similar value in the Gulf of California when there used to be abundant. The next one, please. So this is in Cabo Pulmo, and this was done with one of our students, Carmen Pasos, and she compared the value of the bull sharks with both fished and for tourism. So for the fisheries, same story, about $150 per shark per year, per shark, that's it, for a dead shark, and $26,000 per shark per year. So if you multiply this by the 400 population, so you do the numbers, you're talking about millions of dollars per year that the locals are getting as direct income of this thing. So this really, Cabo Pulmo is an all-around great story in terms of shark conservation. The next one, please. So we're trying to create other MPAs in the Gulf of California because we're lacking of protected areas other than Cabo Pulmo, Espiritu Santo, and Loreto National Park. The rest, it's open area for fishing of whatever you like. So we're trying to create this corridor between Loreto up north to Cabo Pulmo of this protected area because we know there's a corridor of movement of different species of sharks. So we're trying to provide this, have provided this information to the Mexican government to create this new MPA that will protect these offshore waters. The next one, please. I think that's it. Well, many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the powerful things, Carmen Pasos is now on our science team at Shark Stewards, which is really great, but the socioeconomic value that sharks are worth more alive than dead, and we're seeing that all over the world. And started in Palau, one reef shark was valued at $1.9 million to the local economy, whereas a set of fins is worth $100. So if we can impress upon people, and how many divers do we have? I know one guy back there. A lot of divers will pay money to go dive with sharks. And that was shown very well in the film, Sharks of the Sea of Cortez, A Vanishing Treasure. And it probably should be Sharks of the Gulf of California, right?
There are two names, actually three names of the Gulf. It's Gulf of California, yeah. Sea of Cortez, and Vermilion Sea. Yeah. So either of the three are fine.
I thought correct. The Sea of Cortez was that, sort of colonialist. And
yeah, no, it's good. It's a good name. The Spaniards gave that name, so it's okay.
Anyway, so we were talking about social media, and you brought it up, James. And then the East Coast with the apps, like OSearch has this app where you can follow a shark, and we won't talk about OSearch, but there's a lot of technology that can be very favorable and learning and intriguing, and it could also have kind of a negative effect as well, and things can get over amplified. And I'm wondering, John Dodd, if you're seeing on the East Coast with this increase of sightings and tracking sharks through SCOMA's work and Atlantic Shark Institute's work, if you're seeing maybe a negative effect on social media of being able to track these sharks.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's happened is that we find ourselves in a position where we have to explain to people a lot that these sharks have been here a long, long time, and you've likely been swimming with them a long, long time, and they've probably been going by Block Island and Cape Cod and all these other areas for a long time. And we find ourselves repeating that because what happens is we put 11 receivers around a place called Block Island, Rhode Island, and lo and behold, boom, we have a white shark detection, and oh my Lord, there's a white shark at Block Island. And then there's a second and a fifth and an eighth and a 10th, and because we know the tag numbers from these sharks, right? It's like a social security number. So we know that shark number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is a 13.5-foot female. And then we tell everyone it was a 13.5-foot female, and they say, oh my gosh, that was only 400 yards from the beach. So it's something you have to manage a little bit, because you know, these sharks have been doing this for a long, long time. We're just getting better and better at detecting them with this technology that we use. As James said earlier, we have tags that go in the dorsal fin. Every time they break the surface of the water, that goes up to the Argos satellite system. It comes back down and it says, here's where I am. Well, we didn't have that a few years ago, you know, and then you've got acoustic tags that go by, and now with these live receivers, it swims by, it says bing, all the lifeguards get it, and everyone goes into a panic. So it's wonderful technology. We're learning things that we hadn't learned before, we did not know before. So many of these things, suddenly something pops up and you say, what is that shark doing there? You know, James and I were talking earlier, we were doing some poor beagle research, and we saw a couple of these poor beagles go way inside of Cape Cod Bay, two females, both pregnant, way inside where you wouldn't expect them, spent a little bit of time and came out. And you start saying to yourself, well, wait a second, is that where they gave birth? What are they doing in there? So it's fascinating stuff. At the same time, people can misinterpret it very quickly and very easily, and it can create a bit of a panic. I'll give you one brief example. So we caught a white shark about 200 yards from the shore this past summer. We tagged it, we let it go. Then we had another one we caught on the 3rd of July. And I called my friend at Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, the chief of marine fisheries, and said, hey, we just got another white shark. And he said, listen, I just got to Cape Cod with my family for a few days. Can we just sit on that till the 5th of July? And I said, yes, we're going to do that. And there was a whale that actually had died and had come into the inlet. So we're saying, okay, we've got a whale in the inlet, now we've got a white shark. So we said, you know what, we'll hold on that, because that would not have gone well. And I would have been on the beach doing interviews about, is this safe? Should people be in the water? Those kind of things. So, but it is a great way to research. We are learning things we would never have learned. It would take us a much longer time to learn. It is expensive. Last comment is those tags you put in the dorsal fin, spot tags are about $1,000 a tag. So you don't tag 1 or 2 sharks and learn a lot. You got to tag a lot of sharks. We have a PSAT tag you put in, it pops up after a predetermined amount of time, maybe a year. Those are about $4,000 each. But they tell you the depth they've been at, the water temperature, where they were. So there's real value in this stuff. We just have to figure out how to keep the public in an understanding way, that it doesn't mean that these are all new sharks, that these populations are going crazy, because they're not. And we're just getting really good at figuring out where they go.
Well, we were talking earlier about open water swimming, and you piloted one of the women who's swimming, I think, around Long Island, or you can't swim around Long Island. Yeah, not you. But I'm an open water swimmer, and we have open water swimmer, a couple friends. Kim Chambers swam from the Farallones, and I was her pilot and a good friend of mine, and that's from the Farallones here to the Golden Gate. And there was a great film in our festival called Kim Swims. And there's a film in this festival about a woman who decided to take swimming and change her life. And I don't know if there's any dolphin climbers or South Enders in here. I know there's a South Ender here. We swim in the bay all the time, and I did a film called Swim for Sharks. We do a swim around Alcatraz and back. And we know from tracking studies that sharks come into San Francisco Bay, and they go around Alcatraz, and they go back out. And I think part of the conclusion of the film is maybe ignorance is bliss. You're better off knowing that it's 10 feet below you than and then you won't worry about it. I'd like to open it up to the audience, and this has been really a lot of information, a lot of fun. Any questions for any of the panelists about communications, about film, about conservation, marine protection?
Well, I've got another one, which is originally I think we talked about shark recoveries and the differential things. So with the white sharks, you've got them now recovering the East Coast and the West Coast. So is the recovery showing any differences, or is the process kind of more similar, or are the things at play in ones that are not playing together?
So the question was, we have, it's the same species, but 2 discrete populations. The Atlantic population and the Pacific population, Northeast Pacific and Northwest Atlantic, are they recovering in a similar state? Are they one larger than the other? It's a complicated question, but they were both hunted down. John, you want to take a stab at that, and then MJ, you can.
Sure, I'll start. I'll do the East Coast side. How's that? Because that's where I'm from, and that's what we're doing. So I think the answer is that, well, first of all, I'm not going to step on Greg's. So Greg Scommel has been doing a lot of research on this for a decade now. And they've got 300 white sharks tagged, and part of Megan Winton's PhD is she's about to release a paper on population estimates. So that's going to be a significant paper that we're all waiting to see, which is going to do a really good job about saying, here's how many white sharks we think are in the Northwest Atlantic. And there's a bunch of methodologies that you use that are approved, that are understood in the scientific research community. Anecdotally, it seems like we're seeing more of these sharks. And as somebody said earlier, it takes a long, long time. What you have to understand, or what people have come to understand, is it takes 20 years for a mako shark to before she can sexually reproduce, 30 years roughly for a white shark. So you realize when you say, oh, in 1995, generally, you say you can't take any more white sharks. Well, that's great, but 95, 2005, 2015, 2020, we're right where you'd be 25 years later. So it's remarkable to see that this takes a very long time, which is why you don't stop fishing or commercial fishing or take for a couple of years and say, hey, we're good now, which is why these are serious problems to try to address. But on the East Coast, we happen to be right where the nursery grounds are, Montauk, New York. That's southern side, called the New York Bight to New Jersey. This past summer, we caught 9. That was a big number for us. Other studies and combination of groups were probably at 35, 40. Greg's getting all of the subadults and adults because they're large enough to go up to the Cape and wrestle with the seals that were referenced earlier in terms of the high nutritional value. These guys aren't that large. They can't do that. Some of these seals are 800, 900 pounds. They have 2-inch claws. It's not going to happen. So right now, anecdotally, it seems like our population is rising. It seems like it's coming back a little bit. And we're going to wait for Greg's and Megan's paper to say, okay, here's definitively what we've got. But the sense is, one more example. We do a lot of research in the Carolinas. We've got a guy down there that we've caught. He's probably had on 100 white sharks. Has not caught one yet with a tag in it. Yet Greg's put 300 in. We've got 20-something in, and he doesn't have a single catch yet with another tag in it. So if there's 350, 400 white sharks on the East Coast with tags, and we got a guy that's up to 100 hasn't seen one yet, it'll be a pretty decent number, and we're happy about that.
Sam, do you want to talk about the West Coast population?
Yeah, we're jealous. We're very jealous because the most recent population estimate for these waters is roughly 266. It could be as many as 300 or as few as, I think, 216 or thereabouts, but 266 is the sort of the average. And but again, it is kind of divided into demographics. Like we have just the adults and the subadults up here. And one thing that's been happening in just recent years is that, so we've got that population that's always been up here, and they're the ones that feed on the seals and the sea lions. They really don't feed on fish. But since 2015, and this is after we had this triple whammy of El Nino plus general ocean warming, plus the blob, this cell of warm water that hunkered down off the coast of North America, Western North America, sea surface temperatures absolutely spiked. And during that time, a number of juvenile white sharks sort of made the leap. Point Conception down by Santa Barbara, California, used to be a dividing line, like a biogeographic line, where ocean temperatures change radically once you get north of Point Conception. They go very, very low. So like this morning, I checked the buoy data, and it was 50.2 degrees Fahrenheit out near the Farallon, 17 miles offshore. Even down at Santa Cruz, it was like 7 degrees warmer. But the young white sharks, during those those warm water episodes, they do this population push. And we thought maybe they would disappear when sea surface temperatures went back to cold normal again. Some of them have stayed, and there does seem to be that hot tub around Aptos near what they call the cement ship, where there have been just sort of a core group of individuals that have stayed there. But I think that's one reason we need to acknowledge that white sharks can be a very significant indicator of ocean climate change. Because if the scientists were kind of startled by seeing this huge jump in an entire subset, an entire, juvenile set of white sharks suddenly coming this far north, who knows what other changes are happening in the ocean that we've not been able to detect. So, we have to really appreciate them as sentinels of climate change and sort of take some cautionary tales from them that things don't go back to normal necessarily. We've been lucky to have a La Nina, cold water year this year, and so we've had lots of wind. It's really stinky offshore today. It's like 12 to 20 foot combined seas out there. You don't want to be on a boat offshore, but that's perfect for upwelling and for generating food within the ocean food web. But these are great animals for telling us what is out there and what's not out there. What's going to be really interesting is to see how it plays out in the long term. Will those younger sharks stay? And a lot of it's going to be determined, I think, by are those sea surface temperatures going to continue to go kind of nudge back up again into their comfort zone for the juvenile white sharks, because physically they're quite different from the adults. Their teeth change completely because they shift from a regime of being fish eaters when they're younger, so their teeth, their fish teeth are not going to work on seals and sea lions. They need the heavy hardware, the good cutlery, basically, when you're talking about feeding on pinnipeds. So
they don't just migrate north. The animals don't just migrate north.
They're shifting north. Their range is shifting north.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
There was a great scene in the film with Michael Heidhaus in Florida, but down in Shark Bay in Australia, and he did a study with the dugongs and the green sea turtles and seagrass beds, and seagrass beds are significant blue carbon sinks, and we had them here in the San Francisco Bay, and these apex predator sharks didn't necessarily prey on them all the time, but moved these grazers around. So these sharks can actually act as ecosystem architects and even climate mitigants by maintaining this blue carbon source, but also they themselves as marine megafauna, instead of killing them and pulling that carbon out and eating it and going into the atmosphere, it's actually sinking like whales down to the ocean. And so you're having this biological pump of carbon down to the deep sea if we don't kill these sharks. The question of how many sharks are there has always been the hard one among scientists because they're really hard to count. How many sharks are in the sea? That's a tough one, 73 million. We count their fins and estimate statistically. Here on the West Coast, there was a study that MJ alluded to that there are somewhere around, 300 or so adults and subadults in this little subpopulation. But the sharks don't know any borders. They go almost to Hawaii. Some go to Hawaii, and they also share the same genetic makeup as Mexico because they don't have passports. And those Mexican sharks go to the White Shark Cafe and go back. And actually, they go back and forth a little bit, too. And so it could be maybe 1,500. Burgess estimated 3,000, which I think is an extreme outlier. But the bottom line is that there are not very many, even though they are recovering. If you consider how many other numbers of other fish, even large fish like tuna, which are also overfished, there are tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands in populations compared to a very small number. We can only take a couple more questions. We're going to have to wrap up soon. Tiki, you want to take the next one?
Sure. For James, in Mexico, do you think it would work to try to have certain seasons for fishing for certain types of fish? Like we have here crab season, different seasons for certain fish, or for hunting. Basic laws like that, would that work in Mexico?
It works right now.
Let me actually repeat the question. Sorry. Would it help to have seasonal controls in Baja in particular for
there are
fisheries?
controls. There are controls already for shrimp. There are different fisheries, so that exists. The problem is the sharks. There's a shark fishing ban that's 3 months out of the year, but that does not apply for all the species. It was just like a general rule for all the species for the whole country, and but doesn't apply specifically for makos, for example. The breeding time of the makos is not exactly in the summer. That's where the shark fishing ban occurs. So it is. There are regulations, but they're not enough. But in terms of other fisheries, they're in place, and some of them are quite old, and they're kind of work. But like anywhere else in the world, there's lack of enforcement. And also, there are MPAs as well, so we have different tools. So we have fisheries regulations and there are MPAs, but most of these MPAs have no enforcement. And in the case of Caopulmo, it's a no-take. As I said, it's 70% no-take, but they lack park rangers, for example. Sometimes they don't have gas for their boats, or the boat is not working, or things like that. So there's lack of funding to support the enforcement and the surveillance of these places. And the newly created Reviejado Archipelago, it's the largest park in North America, but it's so big that the Mexican government just doesn't have the capacity to protect. So it's great to create MPAs, and that's kind of like the criticism towards creating more MPAs. It's great to create MPAs, but you don't want to create a paper park that there wouldn't be any enforcement or no surveillance. So it doesn't make sense to do all this effort to create MPAs. Anyway, I'm just going off track with your question. Thank you.
Can you have the next slide? So we're just about wrapping it up. One thing I want to talk about next, please, is the power of community science and the power of the mini. And this applies towards regulation and enforcement, because divers actually can help collect data on, and for example, at the Farallones, on CF numbers of vessels fishing in the marine protected area, but also people who are either fishing white sharks for sport, and we're seeing this, and we're getting this through social media, through a bot that we created, thousands of data points of people fishing for sport, protected species. So if you want to scan this QR code or go to our website, it's called Shark Watch, and it actually incorporates scuba divers using their underwater photography to pattern match for science, and hopefully for population ID or movements even of individuals, but also catch. So there's a lot that we can do as individuals, as scuba divers, as people walking on the beach, people who care about sharks diving underwater, that can contribute to science as well as education and conservation. You had a question. I think this has got to be the last question.
I'm a filmmaker for the Smithsonian Ocean Today program, and we're producing a whole collection on sharks.
Cool.
We finished a 5-minute film called Saving Sharks. And I'm curious, from the panel, if you were talking to a middle school kid in regular language, they want to know, like, what can they do? And we had, as producers, we had a really hard time trying to figure out what could kids do other than get more educated, talk to their parents. I'm curious what you as a panel would say, so we can go out and make those.
Great. So this gentleman is a filmmaker. Thank you for coming out from the Smithsonian. They have a great oceans exhibit. Doing a short series on sharks and speaking to young people. What's the best message that we can give to children or youth and how we can save sharks? Is that a good way? Why don't we talk to our friends with jet lag who tend to, well, in some cases speak like children, others to children.
The same question I have for you, Dave, is the way of communication we have towards sharks. I mean, you say, you're a friend of sharks, but you also say it's better not to know that they're like there where I'm swimming. So even in that, there is like this fear still in him, right? So that is, I think, something we have to explore. How do we get rid of that fear, which in the end we all say was Jaws, but maybe it wasn't always only Jaws, because maybe it's the big mouth. What are you looking at? Yeah, you can, soon. And so, I mean, it's really deep in us, yeah? And I don't know if a child, when it sees a shark, will say, oh, this is a nice puppy, right? Because it's not a nice puppy in the end. But that is the question I had for this panel, is actually how can we communicate that they are pretty awesome without having the fear, because now we know you can swim with them, they were there always, but we better don't know about it because we don't want to be scared. Yeah, so that is, I love the question. We should have a coffee about that. You want to add something?
Yeah, I was going to say that in my experience, the kids, they are not afraid yet of sharks. So how many kids will say their favorite animal is the shark because they are, they're big and they're majestic and they're not cute, but they are dramatic somehow. So also, I mean, we were never asked by a kid if we were afraid to dive or swim with sharks. It's always the parents. The parents are always like, oh my God, so you were in the water with these animals, and the kids are like, so cool. Yeah. So I think they don't have that prejudice already. As long as they haven't learned it from their parents, they still have this natural curiosity about anything that's on our planet. They haven't heard so many bad stories, of course.
I think coming back to the storytelling in the film, the International Ocean Film Festival, is one of the things that I want to do is create a youth storytelling workshop making their own short films, because you're seeing more and more media being produced, particularly TikTok and other short media forms from youth. So how do we craft that in a way and maybe tell your kids' stories in your segment?
Yeah, David, I have something to add to that. So one of the things we've tried to do is just talk about, and we kind of finish, because I do a lot of talks, and we just, when I leave, I'm like, listen, sharks are your friend, sharks are good. If sharks aren't around, that's not a good thing. Sharks not in this ocean is not healthy. And we had a thresher shark on the beach in Rhode Island for a week, and everyone was going crazy. And you have to say, listen, there's not even a documented attack ever from a thresher shark. But it's like, listen, kids, and it was actually I think it was a slide in one of the films that showed the classic pyramid, the apex predators, and then if they're gone, suddenly instead of having the second tier, instead of the 30, there's 100, and they eat all the grazers and that kind of stuff. So we try to boil it to that level to say a shark is a critical part, and I'm going to speak to it. I have 3 presentations at the Children's Museum in Connecticut in 2.5 weeks. There's a short film that I'm in, and we're going to talk to kids from 4 to 12, and I'm just starting to put that together to say, how do we explain to them, and we've got a tape measure we're going to pull out for a whale shark and say, look at this shark, but guess what? Here's this shark eats plankton, and here's what this shark does. So we're going to try to boil it to a place where love sharks, appreciate sharks. Sharks around are a good thing because so few people ever go in the water. So few people, many, 99 point whatever, have never seen a shark. So it's not a super concern that we're going to teach these kids to go up and try to pet a shark, because they're not going to have that opportunity. But the hope is just to demonstrate that this is a good thing. They should be your friend. You care about them in a way that hopefully appeals to a 4-year-old and a 12-year-old in the same room. Don't know how that's going to go yet, but we're going to give it a shot. We'll get 3 shots at it, so we'll get better by the end of the day.
Well, we're getting the hook. I want to thank the panelists, everyone in the audience for participating. The International Ocean Film Festival, if you'd like to learn more, ask our guests, please sign up in the back. And let's hear from our shark. What would you tell kids? Thanks, everyone. Thanks to all the volunteers. And especially thank you, International Ocean Film Festival.